Quote, "Our First Amendment stands as a major block to our ability to, quote, hammer it out of existence." He complained that it's really hard to govern because people self-select where they go for their news, which makes it, quote, much harder to build consensus. He was essentially complaining that the peasants are self-selecting their own sources of media. What's next, letting them make up their own minds? You took billions of dollars from taxpayers and you blew it on programs whose entire purpose was to tell them they're wrong about things they can see with their own eyes. You sold us out. And until these rather tiresome questions are answered, this problem is not fixed. Thank you.
Because the FBI was weaponized, then it weaponized the Aspen Institute to brainwash the entire media. It wasn't just that they censored it. It was that they changed the perception of the laptop. They created the perception that it was something other than what it obviously was.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. This USAID stuff just gets more wild and more wild by the day. I have two clips I want to share with you from the House Judiciary Committee hearing on the censorship industrial complex. The first one will be Jim Jordan, Matt Taibbi, and Michael Shellenberger, two great journalists, and Jim Jordan, he's the man. Also, the second clip, a great little speech by Matt Taibbi. What the Democrats have done to this country is treasonous, and a lot of these people should be in jail. Let's get to the clips.
Mr. Shellenberger, can you explain how you traced USAID funding that served as the basis for whistleblower report in 2019, which led to the impeachment of President Trump?
Sure. Well, you may remember that the so-called whistleblower who was in the White House was actually a CIA analyst. And in that whistleblower's complaint, which led to the impeachment, one of the central pieces of evidence was created by a USAID-funded and controlled organization called the OCCRP. And we have another piece out today about how it participated in the Russiagate hoax as well, creating essentially very important information leading to that. So, I mean, you have in USAID a much larger fund of money and a much broader strategy for information control that included censorship, but also, as I mentioned, taking control of investigative journalism really worldwide. I mean, its ambitions were, amazing. So, yeah, I mean, that's an agency when we saw that get shut down by DOJ, I thought that was completely appropriate. If there's something in there that it was doing that's valuable, then you could refund it later. But my view, same thing with CISA, death penalty for organizations that participated in violations of the First Amendment like CISA. Cybersecurity is an extremely important function. It shouldn't be contaminated and undermined by censorship activities.
Well, I think it's always been known that our government has funded the change in administrations, if we can say it politely, of other governments. But isn't it borderline treason when the taxpayer when organizations entrusted with protecting our country are now undermining our own government?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're trying to do regime change, illegal, if you're weaponizing DHS, FBI, CISA, that's treasonous regime change activities redirected, that we developed abroad for regime change, directed against the American people and our representatives. I mean, it's shocking, and we still haven't dealt with it as a country.
Mr. Chairman, I see my time has expired. I'd like to introduce into the record, or ask unanimous consent to introduce into the record, an article in Newsmax, Shellenberger, USAID paid for Trump impeachment effort, dated February 6, 2025.
Without objection. Gentleman yields back. Mr. Taibbi, do you have any idea how many people work at the United States Department of Treasury?
Oh, I don't. I'm sorry.
108,376. And part of the Department of Treasury, of course, is the Internal Revenue Service. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, big part, frankly. Big part. Thousands of people work there, too. And on December 24th, 2022, one of those 108,376 employees at the Department of Treasury decided they were going to start an investigation into you. Is that right?
Yes, that's my understanding.
And that just happened to coincide with the day you did one of the Twitter files. I think one of the important ones. I think it might have been the second one, second or third, but one of those important Twitter files. Is that right?
Yes, it was.
And then a few months later, you're sitting in that same seat testifying in front of this committee, and the very time you're testifying, another one of those 108,376 people knock on your door. Unannounced visit to your home, which, by the way, they've discontinued because of this issue and a bunch of other crazy things they were doing. Is that right?
That's right, Mr. Chairman.
Just for the record, they actually owed you money, right? You didn't do anything wrong. Is that accurate?
They did. They owed me quite a lot of money.
Yeah, okay, I just want to make that clear. But obviously, a way to intimidate someone who is focusing on this issue we're discussing today, right?
Yes.
Now, we just got an order from a judge. The judge in the Southern District of New York said that no political appointees or special government employees can have access to information. 108,376 people can have access to information, but the people the President of the United States selects, the guy who was elected by 77 million people, he can't preliminary injunction against the defendants during the pendency of this from granting any political appointees, special government employees from any access to that information. I don't know about you, Mr. Shellenberger, I find that kind of troubling. 108,000 people can do it, at least one of them, Christmas Eve. We got a federal government employees working hard on Christmas Eve, probably remotely working, going after Mr. Taibbi, but the President of the United States can't have people go in and look and see if we can save some money for the taxpayers. He can't do that according to this judge. Think that makes sense, Mr. Shellenberger?
It doesn't. I mean, my understanding is that the president controls the executive branch and the executive branch
Article
agencies.
2, Section 1, very first sentence, executive power shall be vested in the president, in a president of the United States of America. First sentence.
Yep.
Yeah, but this judge says, no. We got to trust the bureau. This is the fundamental issue. Do you trust the unelected bureaucrats, I think it was Mr. Tiffany and Mr. McClintock, or do you trust the guy who was elected by the people? And that's where I would rather put our trust in the people who they put in office to do these kind of things. Now, you mentioned earlier, I'm going to jump around here and try to get to all of you. Mr. Shellenberger, you mentioned that USAID, which has been in the news of late, spending taxpayer money on all kinds of stupid things, is also involved in the censorship effort. And I want you to just elaborate on that a little bit, because this is going on as we speak. I want you to elaborate on that for the committee, if you would.
Guys, sorry to stop it right here. If you don't mind just smashing that thumbs up button for your boy, it really goes a long way to help me out. And also, if you're not yet subscribed and this is not your first time here, hopefully this could be the video that I earn your subscription. Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to understand that USAID viewed this very holistically. And it's important, if you look at the Hunter Biden laptop case, which is an extremely important case to understand, because the FBI was weaponized, then it weaponized the Aspen Institute to brainwash the entire media. It wasn't just that they censored it. It was that they changed the perception of the laptop. They created the perception that it was something other than what it obviously was. And that's what these guys are trying to do. These are called information operations, and USAID has been in the process of taking over so-called independent investigative journalism around the world, and at the same time then training NGOs how to demand censorship. For example, Mr. Aaron's organization has been working to train organizations to so-called flag misinformation behind the scenes. By the way, it's one thing to criticize somebody publicly, which we should all be engaged in.
Yeah.
But this thing where you're skulking around,
We do that all the
and
time.
secretly, yeah, that's what open democracy is. This thing of going out and like secretly flagging information behind the scenes and demanding censorship, that's completely an abomination. That is not what
I just want to be clear. You're saying USAID, your investigation is now engaged in this pre-bunking kind of concept and process that they did with the laptop story in the fall of 2020.
And it's the exact same approach as well, where often what they're doing, for example, with USAID, OCCRP, is that they're leaking intelligence from the intelligence agencies. And not like WikiLeaks where they just dumped it, I think probably too much without the proper redactions, but they're strategically leaking it and then manipulating places like The Guardian and the New York Times to publish certain stories and control the whole investigative news process.
And we saw this from Yoel Roth's testimony. He testified during these weekly meetings that federal law enforcement communicated to us there was going to be hack and leak operations before the presidential election, likely in October. We had these, so that what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and then they said here who it's going to involve, that there were rumors that the hack and leak operation would involve Hunter Biden. So they set them all up. And then Shazam, they set them all up because they had the laptop and they knew what was coming. And when it happens, everyone buys into what the 51 former intel officials say.
That's right.
Mr. Subramanian, I want to give you the last word. RFK, I just want you to I appreciate the historical perspective you brought when you testified last Congress, but one of the statements that stuck with this last Congress was actually a statement made by RFK Jr. when he said, when you look at history, it is never the good guys who are for censorship. And that's what we're trying to keep in mind and stop it from both sides, from all sides. We want the First Amendment.
Everything that's coming out from USAID and all these other agencies that have been funding anti-American nonsense, just nonsense, and committing what I would call crimes against the American people. Now we're finding out that the USAID helped fund the COOF, the pandemic, the C-19 in Wuhan. A lot of people were locked into their homes for the better part of 2 years because of all this crap. You don't get that back. Nobody's going to apologize. And this is the thing. Nobody on the left is apologizing for anything or saying that it was wrong. They're not even talking about it. They're sweeping it under the rug. Even the leftoid media. Nobody wants to talk about the findings. And if you're not talking about the findings and you're more concerned about Elon Musk looking into it, you're the problem. If you're a taxpayer and you're not offended by this or grossed out by it, you're the problem. Let's get to Matt Taibbi's great speech.
2 years ago, when Michael and I first testified before your Weaponization of Government subcommittee, Democratic members called us so-called journalists, suggested we were bought-off scribes, and questioned our ethics and our loyalties. When we tried to answer, we were told to shut up, take off our tinfoil hats, and remember two things. One, there is no digital censorship, and two, if there is digital censorship, it's for our own good. I was shocked. I thought the whole thing had to be a mistake. There was no way the party that I gave votes to my whole life was now pro-censorship. Then last year, I listened to John Kerry, whom I voted for, talk to the World Economic Forum. Speaking about disinformation, he said, quote, "Our First Amendment stands as a major block to our ability to, quote, hammer it out of existence." He complained that it's really hard to govern because people self-select where they go for their news, which makes it, quote, much harder to build consensus. Now, I defended John Kerry when people said he looks French, but Marie Antoinette would have been embarrassed by this speech. He was essentially complaining that the peasants are self-selecting their own sources of media. What's next, letting them make up their own minds? Lastly, building consensus may be a politician's job, but it's not mine as a citizen or as a journalist. In fact, making it hard to govern is exactly the media's job. The failure to understand this is why we have a censorship problem. This is an Alamo moment for the First Amendment. Most of America's closest allies, as both Rupa and Michael have pointed out, have already adopted draconian speech laws. We are surrounded. The EU's new Digital Services Act is the most comprehensive censorship law ever instituted in a Western democratic society. Ranking Member Raskin, you don't have to go as far as Russia or China to find people jailed for speech. Our allies in England now have an online safety act which empowers the government to jail people for nebulous offenses like false communication or causing psychological harm. Germany, France, Australia, Canada, and other nations have implemented similar ideas. These laws are totally incompatible with our system. Some of our own citizens have been harassed or even arrested in some of these countries, but our government has not stood up for them. Why? Because many of our bureaucrats believe in these laws. Take USAID. Many Americans are now in an uproar because they learned about over $400 million going to an organization called Internews, whose chief, Jeannie Bourgeot, boasted to Congress about training hundreds of thousands of people in journalism, but her views are almost identical to Kerry's. She gave a talk once about building trust and combating misinformation in India during the pandemic. She said that after months of a really beautifully unified COVID-19 message, vaccine enthusiasm rose to 87%. But when, quote, mixed information on vaccine efficacy got out, hesitancy ensued. We're paying this person to train journalists, and she doesn't know that the press does not exist to promote unity or political goals like vaccine enthusiasm. That's propaganda, not journalism. Bourgeot also once said that to fight bad content, we need to work really hard on exclusion lists or inclusion lists and, quote, really need to focus our ad dollars toward what she called the good news. Again, if you don't know, the fastest way to erode trust in media is by having government sponsor exclusion lists. You shouldn't be getting $1 in taxpayer money, let alone 476 million of it. And USAID is just a tiny piece of the censorship machine Michael and I saw across that long list of agencies. Collectively, they've bought up every part of the news production line: sources, think tanks, research, fact-checking, anti-disinformation, commercial media scoring, and when all else fails, straight-up censorship. It is a giant closed messaging loop whose purpose is to transform the free press into exactly that consensus machine. There is no way to remove this rot surgically. The whole mechanism has to go. Is there right-wing misinformation? Hell yes. It exists in every direction. But I grew up a Democrat and don't remember being afraid of it. At the time, we figured we didn't need censorship because we thought we had the better argument. Obviously, many of you lack the same confidence. You took billions of dollars from taxpayers and you blew it on programs whose entire purpose was to tell them they're wrong about things they can see with their own eyes. You sold us out. And until these rather tiresome questions are answered, this problem is not fixed. Thank you.
I love that all this stuff is coming out, and I also love that the left are not changing their rhetoric at all, because that means we're going to be in power for the foreseeable future. Matt Taibbi, by the way, guys, if you are into reading or reading blogs, I guess I should say, or journalistic posts, Matt Taibbi has a great Substack. I'm a subscriber to it. It helps fund an actual journalist, and also it's a great read. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you were informed by it, if you enjoy it, please consider leaving a thumbs up on it. And again, if you're not yet subscribed and this is not your first time here, hopefully this could be the video that I earn your subscription. I'll catch you all in the next video. Peace out, everybody.